I'm so very happy to be welcoming Francesco Turrisi. Francesco, as we tune in, I think we're finding you home in Ireland, right?
Yes, I am just south of Dublin in Greystones, about an hour south of Dublin. This is my music room, as you can see.
And audiences met you at the Ojai Festival in the 21 Festival in your musical partnership with Rhiannon Giddens. And I think we already saw you play frame drums and piano and accordion and probably some other instruments. Take us a little bit through your journey. How did your musical life begin? And when and why did it just keep expanding out? And I know it still keeps expanding out. There's sort of no limit.
Yeah, I don't come from a very music family. Actually, no one in my family ever played music, as far as I know. Um, so I discovered it by myself, kind of during middle school, around that kind of age. We had a piano at home. Actually, my father for a minute was flirting with the idea of playing the piano, and that's the first instrument that I studied. So I kind of started a little bit just with a teacher. My mom saw that I was into it, but they never wanted me to do it for real, if you know what I mean. There was a lot of music that I wasn't really ready to understand at that age, you know. So I got a little bored and I dropped it. But I really got interested in guitar because I was in high school by then. So my sister had a guitar, she had kind of played it a little bit. So I started learning by myself. I kind of taught myself some acoustic guitar, and then I got into electric guitar, started playing with rock bands, had long hair, and all that kind of thing. Um, the next, this is a lot of chapters. I'll try to be quick. The next chapter is how I got into jazz, actually, because that's the theme that I ended up studying at the conservatory. From rock, I kind of started listening to jazz rock and sort of fusion type of music, and I got interested in jazz. And I mean, on the guitar, I was playing by ear mostly. Rock music, it's pretty simple, you could say, harmonically, you know? So I could just improvise and play solos. But when it got to jazz, I just didn't really understand what was going on. This was way too complicated. And I couldn't read on the guitar, I could read on the piano. So I thought, maybe I need to learn a new instrument. And I started playing saxophone. So for a few years, I studied saxophone, and that's when I really got into jazz. It's a long story. Then I had actually a physical problem. I couldn't play for a while the saxophone, and I ended up switching back to the piano, which kind of was there in the background all the time. And going back to the piano kind of all of a sudden made all this sense, that didn't earlier on. And that's so at age 19, then I left Italy and I went to the Netherlands to study jazz at the Royal Conservatory of The Hague. Um, it's a big school with an amazing jazz programs with incredible teachers. There's some American teachers. It's very well known in Europe for jazz, but it's also very well known for early music, of which I knew nothing at that stage. But while being there to studying jazz, I kind of came across early music, so historical performance practice, Baroque music, Renaissance music. I was very attracted to the idea of improvisation in early Baroque music, in late Renaissance music. So I started kind of hanging out with the early music department unofficially and became friends with one of the harpsichord teachers, and we exchanged knowledge. We used to meet up, and he wanted to learn some jazz harmony, and I would teach him that, and he would teach me some basso continuo, improvised accompaniments for Baroque music. So I was still like officially studying, and I was gigging basically with this band all over Europe, and it was a great opportunity also because she does very contaminated projects, with a lot of different crossover stuff. I even played piano in some of the projects, some more jazz crossover, but also a lot of crossover with Southern Italian music.
Mm.
And that's when I started getting really deep into frame drums, Italian traditional music. It was through early music, bizarrely enough, because although my family comes from southern Italy, we never had that. It was never given to me. It was not part of who I was, and it's really hard to find it. it's really hard to find it. I see it even in Ireland. Traditional music is everywhere, but it's one of the only places really in Europe where it's really like that. You know, in Italy, unless you really know where you're going, it's very hard to hear proper traditional music in its context. So I met a lot of musicians and I started learning these drums, the techniques, especially the ones from Sicily, which is really where my family comes from. And I started getting interested also in other music which are connected to the Mediterranean, you know, because obviously Sicily is in the middle of the Mediterranean and is as influenced by North Africa as it is by, you know, Turkey or everywhere, you know. It's like everything is really connected
The
there. So,
Mediterranean currents blow through.
exactly. I mean, even though I hate that we could talk about Mediterranean music like if it was a thing, you know, it's obviously thousands of different styles of music, you know, but there is definitely connections, you know, and I was really fascinated by the connections that between Southern Italian music and Arabic music, especially, you know, because the Arabs were in Sicily for a very long time, and this was in the Middle Ages. Of course, it's a very long time ago. It's hard, but we still see the signs everywhere in the language, in the food, in the name of the places. You know, the Arab domination had a very strong influence everywhere in Europe, actually. That's something I talk about a lot, you know. We don't talk about it, but even just the food, you know, you know, it's like the Arabs brought pasta to Italy. It's not Marco Polo. In Italy, they tell this legend that Marco Polo went to China and brought back noodles. No, really, it was during the Arab domination that actually long noodles were appearing for the first time. Because you know the empire was so wide at the time, we literally went from India to Morocco. So of course things traveled within the empire and all the good and the bad of empires. But anyway, I'm moving tangentially. So I got really interested into a lot of that, and I started studying. I mean, all of that kind of music I studied a little bit on my own. And whenever I get a chance to collaborate with musicians, I try to learn from them and study a little bit of makam, you know, the modal scales of both Arabic music and Turkish music, or they're a little bit everywhere in the area. So trying to think of all the other stuff, because, you know, you can see all of these things in the playlist, right?
It is
Another
actually, I think everything you've just said is a kind of perfect setup for the playlist, but let me let you finish your thoughts, sorry.
No, another thing that I just wanted to mention is another great passion that I have is for Brazilian music. There's one track there from Brazil, and it also, it was already when I was a jazz student, because of course, you know, a lot of Brazilian music is very closely connected to jazz when bossa nova became a craze, you know. But also I went to Brazil a few times and I have a lot of friends, and kind of started digging a little bit deeper into the incredible myriads of rhythm and musics that exist in it's almost like a continent. You know, it's such a huge country. And, you know, it's a little bit like the United States in the sense that it's this incredible mix of African diaspora and European influence and indigenous, you know. So, but it's completely different in American, you know. But at the same time, there is the same, I think, I find the same excitement in that music that I do with American music, with the United States, you know. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, like you said, I'm very omnivore. I'm always listening to music. I'm always get really excited about stuff and get quite obsessed with sounds and instruments. So if anything, I'm trying to stop because it's too much sometimes, you know.
And given your wide taste, I gave an almost impossible assignment saying just pick 10 things to give us a snapshot. So I should say this isn't Francesco's top 10, it's a 10. And
Yes.
I think in any given day, on any given hour, there would be another 10 that's just as rich and wide ranging. Let's plunge in. Let's begin on the list. Your first piece is called Slide Dance with Secret Trio. Tell us a little about this.
So this is it's funny how I discovered this record. I knew some of the musicians in here. So first of all, these are musicians. This recording is made in the United States, right? So we have Armenian American musician Ara Dinkian. I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Who plays
Who
the
is
oud?
He plays the oud, and he was born in the United States, as far as I know. But he obviously, I knew him. I knew some of his music that kind of do a little bit of crossover with some more jazz stuff. The other two guys I didn't know him at all. Ismail Lumanovsky, who I believe you know as well. I think he's from Macedonia originally, right?
Yes.
He's a clarinetist, and Tamer Pinarbashi, who is a Turkish kanun player, instrument that I love.
And kanun is like a lap zither, like plucked
Exactly.
instrument.
Yes, and it's
the
plucked
Middle East.
Traditionally it's very big in Arabic music and in Turkish music. Traditionally it's plucked with two plectrums on metal plectrums on the fingers, but Tamer is actually a quite innovative kanun player, and he plays without plectrum. He plays only with fingers, like if it was a guitar. So he plays with all of his fingers. It's a very arpeggio kind of style, so you get less volume, less attack, but more movement. And the interesting thing about this instrument is diatonic, like a Irish harp would be. So it's not fully chromatic, but you have all these little bridges that you can move to change the notes, right? But so exactly like the Celtic harp. But the Celtic harp has got one bridge for the half tone. Turkish music has got like 36 notes per octave, if not more. So you've got all these micro tonal bridges. It's really complicated, but it's beautiful. So I bought this CD in Istanbul. I used to go there quite often with Arpeggiata, and I really made friends with these people in a city shop very close to Taksim. Beautiful city shop. I would go in, they knew me already, and CDs were so cheap in Istanbul. It was literally like €3 for Turkish music. And so I went to the counter with a pile of CDs. This Kalan is the label, is a Turkish music label. So much amazing stuff. And the guy goes like, you should really check this one out. And he gives me the Secret Trio. And I'm like, it was the only one who was like €15. And I was like, come on, I'm not going to spend €15 when everything else is like €3 and €4. And he was like, no, you really want to buy this. It's amazing. And I was like, and I was like, but why is it so expensive? Oh, it's made in the States. And I was like, what? This makes no sense. I'm here to buy Turkish music. I bought it, and he was so right. It's actually one of my favorite albums ever. I just think that they managed to create this pan sort of modal music that has flavors of like the Balkans with the clarinet, of Turkey, and of course Armenia, but also I think represents the Western world too, because a lot of his compositions are almost like poppy, I would say, They're very melodic in a Western way, So I think it's beautiful. I love it, and super groovy, and yeah, check it out.
So that's Slide Dance, played by the unlikely trio of clarinet, kanun, lap zither, and the oud. And just as a footnote, the clarinetist Ismail Lumanovsky was a student at Juilliard during my time as dean there, and his big project was playing the Elliott Carter clarinet concerto with Pierre Boulez conducting. So it seems to be a Francesco Turrisi specialty, which is to find musicians who do many things well.
Yeah.
We take a huge leap, Francesco, for your next selection, which is by an early 17th century Italian composer who I didn't know, Biagio Marini. Tell us about this one.
So this is the kind of music that I really love. Early 17th century Italian music. Biagio Marini would have been quite known at the time, wrote a lot of vocal music, wrote quite a lot of instrumental music too. I love about this period, it's a little bit of a moment in which things are changing, It's like music is coming from late Renaissance into Baroque, but it has features of both. It's still quite model, but it's also getting a little bit tonal. And a lot of these Italian composers, this is also the era in which the violin develops, all these early violin sonatas, because until then, violin was actually a folk instrument, was not really considered very elevated, mostly because the construction of the instruments was very poor. So it's with the school of Cremona and all the Stradivarius, which develop around this kind of time, the violin got elevated to be the instruments. But until then, it was always viols, it was always lutes, it was all the fancy instruments for court. Violin was like a rough instrument, right? But yeah, so Biagio Marini, this piece is it's a passacaglia, which is an ostinato bass line, so a kind of a recurring bass line. It's almost like jazz, It's the same bass line that just keeps happening over and over again, and it's a piece written for three voices. Even though he says one, it's not obligatory. So you could do it with two violins, for example, and continuo. I think here the performer is Jordi Savall, who's of course everyone who knows anything about early music knows Jordi Savall. He's a great viola da gamba player, and I think it's him playing on the third voice and improvising all these diminutions, around that simple melody. I don't know. It's just this music is so melodic and so beautiful. It's like some of my favorite music. It's what I put on every morning when I get up. I put early 17th century Italian instrumental music. I actually play an arrangement of this in my piano solo concerts. It's on my record as well. Just this little melody, that keeps coming back.
We go from 17th century Italy to sort of Cuba next with music with Pedrito Martinez. Tell us about this one.
Oh, I love this record so much too. It's one of those records where it's obviously a fusion concept record, but you almost don't notice because it's so good. The connection is so good. So Pedrito Martinez is a Cuban percussionist that lives in New York, as far as I know. This is a project that he does called Rumba de la Isla, and it's a homage to Camarón de la Isla, one of the greatest flamenco singers ever. So it's very interesting how. Sorry, there was a bit of a noise there. Sorry. It's very interesting how Cuban music and flamenco, you never really think them, connected in any way. But when you hear this, you hear a kind of a connection that it's a little bit older than I think we think, because it's like as the New World was discovered and all the ships were coming to the New World, they were all passing through Cuba, right? And I always think about there is a whole set of, in the Renaissance times, there is a whole set of music which kind of went crossover between the two sides of the ocean, right? So, for example, there was a lot of music that got developed in the Caribbean that then got re-imported in Europe and influenced like Baroque music, for example. The Chacona, was a dance that originally came from South America, apparently, and became all the rage. So this kind of connection I think already happened a lot, and this record made me think a little bit of that. And also, of course, when I think about flamenco, I hear Mediterranean music in there too, right? It's, of course, the music of the gypsies, of the Roma gypsies from southern Spain, but in Spain, again, there was all this huge Arabic influence and all these different connections. So I don't know. It's just, I think it's a very magical mix, these rhythms which are very you could say African, the sound of the clave, and at the same time, flamenco also is based on a kind of a clave concept, a recurring rhythmical pattern. So there is similarities, and I can hear it so clearly in this record. I just love the sound of it. That's all. Que me lleve contigo, porque yo no me hallo, llegar afuera de tu cariño.
The next piece you selected really caught me by surprise, because if I was hearing it cold, not knowing anything about it, I might guess it's almost like new medieval music. Tell us about it and what you're hearing in it and how you found it.
So this is Christian Wallumrød Ensemble, is a Norwegian pianist. So it's a record that is out on ECM, which is a label that I love so much. And it's a label that has a lot of different sounds in it, but it kind of, symbolizes a lot of European jazz and also a lot of Northern European jazz, Scandinavian jazz, even though that's not really a thing. But we have a sound. What I love about this music is that it has sometimes simplicity of folk music. There is sounds in it that are very unique. I picked this track as well and this particular record because the trumpet player Arve Eriksen is one of my favorite musicians ever. He's got the most incredible sound. I've heard him live so many times. He can literally just play one note and he makes me cry. When I hear that, it's so moving. It's so original. It's so breathy and airy. His trumpet sound, and also on the other side there is a fiddle player, a violin player called Niels Ockland. So already that combination of trumpet and violin in a slightly more jazz folky context is very unique, and the music is very minimal. It's a lot about atmosphere, it's a lot about sound. So one of the things that they say about ECM when it was originally founded by Manfred Eicher, his great producer, who's still alive, who still does most of their records, is that it kind of looked at the world of jazz and improvised music and contemporary music, but it brought to jazz the sound of classical music as well, so it's recorded even with more attention to sound and to the atmosphere. So that for me is the most ECM track ever.
Well, you've been talking a lot about this transatlantic influence, New World, Old World, in several of the things we're listening to. We go to Brazil and hear from a Brazilian guitarist and composer. Tell us about him.
So this is Ginga. Ginga, oh my God, I remember the day I discovered his music. I was like, what is this thing, that Ginga was a dentist for most of his life. He was like not a professional musician. It was one of those that all the musicians knew him. Everyone respected him as a composer, he wrote a lot of music and songs for famous singers, but he worked as a dentist. So it's one of those crazy stories, but his music is so unique. It's one of the things that I love about Brazil is that they've got of course all the rhythm stuff, So when I was a student in the conservatory in jazz, you always think about Brazil as bossa nova, and I mean bossa nova is great, it's a sound, but it's a bit hard to dissociate it with what it has become, which is kind of a little bit of elevator background music sometimes, So I was always a little bit like, yeah, Brazil, whatever, and until someone made me discover real Brazilian music and the variety, that there is in there, and the rhythm, the amount of rhythm that there is, but also the amount of melody and harmony, that there is very unique. And this is I think a post bossa nova thing, because it's a bit simplistic to just think that with bossa nova the composer started getting influence from jazz and, you know, slow down the rhythms of samba and created this music. The reality is that, you know, Jobim was influenced by Debussy as much as he was from jazz, you know. So I think it kind of started its own direction a little bit, you know. And they also have a very strong feeling for melody, like a very romantic feeling for melody. So when you listen to Ginga plays guitar and his really interesting and quite weird way of harmonizing music and even singing, you know, he's obviously not a singer, but he's got this very particular color. I just think it's such an amazing, it's like the most poetic music I can think of. I think he's an incredible poet, and I just love his sound, so I picked this one here.
Speaking of what not to expect, we move next on your playlist to, in a way, some of the most straight-ahead jazz with Brad Mehldau.
Yeah, so Brad Mehldau is, I don't know, I think he's probably one of my favorite jazz pianists. I listened to a lot of classic jazz, of course, when I was studying, and my teacher was very, very old school, bebop, straight ahead. But with Brad Mehldau, for me, I felt like the first time I heard him, I was so it spoke to me so much because it had all of that tradition, all of the hard swinging. His rhythm stuff is incredible, but he also had something different. He had a connection for me to a classical sound that I loved. For me, a lot of jazz pianists, they don't really focus on sound when they sit at the piano. It's all about rhythm and percussive, you know, it's a percussion instrument in a lot of jazz. Brad Mehldau has this approach, like, and the way he writes music, like this tune is almost like a late romantic type melody. It's almost like Brahmsian, you know, in the way he moves through the harmony, and he's got this spleen about him as well, you know. And for me, it was really kind of connected the words that made sense to me, you know, the beautiful sound, classical piano, and the hard swinging jazz. And still does. Still one of the guys that I prefer to listen to when I listen to jazz.
Now switch back to sort of classic Italian Baroque and the great Italian violin school, music of Arcangelo Corelli.
Yes, so this is more late 17th century, you know, it's a different style, but such lush music. It's so fat. I don't know how else to describe it. You know, the harmony of this music, you know, the harmony, I'm always so surprised, it's almost jazzy, you know, it's got nines and extensions and really lush chords. But what I love about this recording, this is Stefano Montanari, who is a great violinist, and now is mostly conducting as far as I know, is that a lot of his music is originally written in a quite simplistic way, especially the slow movements. And I think people forget that at the time people improvised like maniacs. They played so many notes. And this is one of the only recordings where I really feel that they're really trying to go in that direction. So there is a very heavily ornamented, you know, in a way that I think that if we would hear it now, we would think it's bad taste. I'm quite convinced, because, you know, when you hear people talk about it at the time, you know, we have like people talking about the concerts, and we have some transcriptions of the ornamented versions, they're so heavy, like black pages, like Frank Zappa black pages. Seriously, Vivaldi, adagios, things like that. They were so dense. So I love this recording. I think they've done a great job in writing this ornamentation. I think this is their original ornamentation, and it's very tasteful and very beautiful.
And very sumptuous and very sensual too in sound.
Absolutely.
Our next musician was completely new to me, Efren Lopez, who must be your spiritual brother somehow, a Spanish pan-stylist, pan-culture musician. I was thrilled to discover him. Tell us more about him.
So it's funny when people say to me, "Oh my God, you play so many instruments," and I'm like, "I'm a multi-instrumentalist. Look at this guy." My friend literally plays every instrument, like literally everything. He's an amazing guy. He's a bit of a genius, I think. He's also an incredible sound engineer recording. He recorded the album himself. He's a guy that I came across through the school of Ross Daly, who is this originally Irish, actually, musician that settled down in Crete and created a school called Labyrinth, which kind of combines all the different modal traditions of the Mediterranean and of they go as far as Indian stuff these days, So it's a place where people go in the summer and they study and they have seminars, and a lot of musicians who are attracted by this music end up gravitating around this character who's a bit of a guru, almost like in the Far East way. So a friend comes through I met him through that school, and I just loved it. I love his sound. He's from Catalonia, and he has such a mastery of all modal music, like from medieval all the way to plays amazing Turkish oud, so he plays all the Ottoman makam style. He can play like literally hurdy-gurdy, and then in the next minute, he's playing all the Turkish lutes, the saz. So his record is like that. And again, this is a fusion that doesn't feel contrived. For me, everything on that record sounds completely different. It sounds so together. And so this is another connection that I was like, oh, no one has ever done it before. I mean, it's Turkish music. So at the beginning, he plays this huge saz, which is a long neck lute. That's that instrument you hear at the beginning. And it's a beautiful sound. Then there is a lira player, Cretan lira, which is obviously a Greek instrument. And then all of a sudden, the voice comes in and he's a flamenco singer. And you're going, what? It's flamenco? What's got flamenco to do with Turkish music? And I was like, oh, it makes total sense. They just fit so well together. Even in saz, they play and they hit the instrument with their hands in the same way flamenco guitarists do. Golpe, they call it in flamenco. So you hear this percussive wood sound, and he's not putting it on. That's how it's played traditionally in Turkey too. So I was just going, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And it's, I don't know, it's a very intense, beautiful track.
The next one is yours, Czar and La Tarantella dell'Avena. And Tarantella is somehow perfect. It's a slow burn that goes and becomes a wildfire. Usually, tell us about this track and your collaborators on this.
Yeah, so I dare to put one of my own tracks. I didn't really want to, but I really wanted to represent Italy, and I really wanted you to listen to this singer. Lucilla Galeazzi is her name. I met her in Arpeggiata. She's a force of nature. She's actually a character a little bit like Rhiannon. When she walks on stage, it's like time stops. There's nothing else you can concentrate on. It's such a powerhouse. So tarantella is obviously music from southern Italy. People often associate it with Godfather wedding dance type of thing, because that's part of it too. It became a thing in the 19th century. It became stylized as a lot of classical composers wrote tarantellas, but the roots of it are much more deep, and they are connected to a trance dance rite of healing, from the bite of a spider, tarantula. That's why it's called tarantella. So it's too long of a conversation to have here, but that tradition nearly died in Italy. The last time it was observed happening, as in these rituals were still happening, was in the 1960s. Then it kind of, with industrialization of Italy, which came quite late, by the way, after the Second World War, and in the South even later, they all died. So nowadays people have revived a lot of these traditions, but you don't see them anymore like that. So this is a kind of it's a project Czar that I made with a percussionist called Andrea Piccioni many years ago, which looked at connecting Southern Italian music to a broader Mediterranean world, so to Arabic music and to different things. I play the piano, and for me, when I heard this melody, it's usually tarantella tends to be quite major, but it can be also modal and minor. Like this one is really minor. And this modality made me think almost like a John Coltrane model quartet from the 60s, So that's actually what I'm playing on the piano, is a pretty McCoy Tyner style. And it just fits so well, And the other instrument that you hear there, so there is tamburello, the Italian percussion instruments, those guys there. And there is a bowed instrument, which is a relative of the lira that you hear in Greece, or the kemenche that you hear in Turkey, and it's called lira, and it's in Calabria very, very common. So Calabria again is that tip, obviously, that looks at Greece, and they use it for tarantella. It's a folk instrument. It's not, because kemenche in Turkey is kind of a fancy instrument, but in Greece is really folky. So this is more connected to the Greek sound of it. The tarantella on the lira sounds amazing. There is a very particular bow articulation that they can do. And this is what we create in this track.
And then we end up at the very end with something very pure, just unaccompanied voice, and pretty magical. An Armenian singer who is new to me. So you've introduced part of my culture to me, although the song is a very well-known song. Sareri Hovin Mernem, I would die for the wind of the mountains, is what the title translates to. Tell us about how you came upon Lena Chamamian, who was a Syrian Armenian singer who now lives in Paris, having sadly fled her homeland.
Yes. I first learned this song from a Greek singer called Savina Yiannatou, who's a great singer that is also an ECM artist that I love and that I did a few projects with in the past. And she has this thing, she comes from contemporary music actually, but then she got into folk music quite late, and she has this pan-Mediterranean thing as well, where she does a song from Sardinia and then a song from Greece and then a song, all over the place, and it goes as far to this Armenian song. So she brought it to the project, and I was like, wow, I love this melody so much, because I love Armenian music in general so much, because again, for me, it also connects East and West in a very particular way, so I loved it, and I started doing a research on the song, and I came across this recording. So I literally discovered this online just by putting it, Googling it, And when I heard this recording, I was like, I sent it to everyone. I remember I was going, isn't this the most incredible thing ever? Just the purity of her voice and the way she sings all the microtonal stuff. Oh my God, it's so beautiful.
Sareri hovin mernem, hovin mernem, hovin mernem. Im yari boyin mernem, boyin mernem, boyin mernem.
Francesco, I think you were in a way made for Ojai, and the spirit of adventure. I just love how the musical world gets bigger every time we talk, and especially every time we listen to something. So, thanks for the richness of this time together and everything you've introduced us to, and also just can't wait to be together in that California sunshine.
Yes, thanks for having me, and I look very much forward to it. Such a nice memories from last time. Very beautiful, special place.